Hi, my name is Chris Brennan with theastrologyschool.com. The purpose of this video is to talk about the Zodiacal Releasing Time Lord technique. Alright, let's get right into it. So, what is Zodiacal Releasing? Zodiacal Releasing is an ancient timing technique from the Greco-Roman or Hellenistic tradition of astrology from roughly 2,000 years ago. And it's actually one of a collection of techniques that have been recovered over the past 20 years through translations of ancient texts. And this collection of timing techniques were known in the Greek astrological tradition as Time Lord systems. And the basic premise behind the Time Lord systems is that one, not all parts of a person's chart are activated at all times, but instead different parts of the chart actually lay dormant, and there's certain natal potentials in the chart that are lying sort of asleep or inactive until those placements are awakened through these timing techniques, through the Time Lord systems, and then the natal potential, the latent potential of those placements in the birth chart becomes activated and unleashed in the life of the native. So researchers have actually recovered at least half a dozen major Time Lord systems that were used in ancient astrology that did not survive into modern times, and they were only recovered over the past 10 or 20 years through translations of ancient texts. So one of the most powerful Time Lord systems that's been recovered so far is known today as Zodiacal Releasing. And this is a Time Lord technique that was recovered from the text of the 2nd century astrologer Vettius Valens, who lived sometime, let's say sometime around the year 175 CE. He composed a series of textbooks for his students because he actually had a school for astrology in the Greco-Roman city of Alexandria in Egypt in the mid-2nd century. So in book 4 of his anthology, Valens actually says in chapter 4 that he's going to introduce a powerful timing technique, and he tells you the reader to pay attention because this is a really potent technique. And he proceeds to introduce this pretty kind of complicated but really interesting and intriguing and ultimately very effective technique for dividing a person's life into different chapters and subsections as if the life was a book, and you were able to tell where each chapter starts and where each chapter ends. So that's, broadly speaking, to give the most broad description of the technique that I can, that's the sort of metaphor that I use, that it divides the native's life up into chapters and paragraphs as if the life was a book, and you could read the narrative of the native's life as if it was a story. So the technique is different. It works a little bit differently than most of the techniques that we're used to in modern astrology because it divides the entire native's life up into these chapters and paragraphs. But it can also be useful for not just dividing the life into chapters, but also sometimes identifying the content of those chapters. And in some instances, you can determine what the most important chapters are in the native's life, or which ones are going to be more active and more pivotal in terms of the overall series of the native's life events and their life story, or in some instances, their life's work. You can also use the technique in order to identify which chapters of the native's life are going to be experienced as more subjectively positive versus which chapters of the native's life are going to be experienced as more subjectively negative or challenging. So the way that the technique works is in order to find the starting point for the technique, you actually have to calculate two what's known in modern times as Arabic parts, but what was known in ancient astrology as the lots. So the primary lot that you want to use is the lot of fortune, which is known as the part of fortune in modern times. And the other lot that you need to use is called the lot of spirit, which is sometimes called the part of spirit in modern times or in some modern astrology software programs. So it turns out that this timing technique, or this Time Lord technique, is one of the major things the lot of fortune was used for in ancient astrology. So it's actually kind of important recovering this technique because even though the lot of fortune is still sometimes included in modern charts, people generally aren't really sure what to do with it or what it's really supposed to mean or anything like that. And it turns out that it was originally an integral component of this very complicated timing technique. So you want to calculate the sign that contains the lot of fortune, and you want to calculate the sign that contains the lot of spirit. Once you've done that, you then attribute a certain number of years to each of the signs of the zodiac based on the planet that rules those signs, and based on a set of planetary periods that are known as the minor years of the planets in ancient astrology. And the minor years of the planets, I'll just list them very quickly in zodiacal order, starting from Cancer. The period associated with Cancer is 25. The period associated with Leo is 19. The period associated with the two signs ruled by Mercury, which is Gemini and Virgo, is 20. The period associated with the two signs ruled by Venus, which are Taurus and Libra, is 8. The period associated with the two Jupiter-ruled signs, which is Sagittarius and Pisces, is 12. And the period associated with Capricorn is 27, and Aquarius is 30. So what you want to do is you've calculated the lot of spirit and the lot of fortune. Next, you want to determine what you want to study in the native's life, because the topic that you want to study will dictate which part or which lot you start from. Generally speaking, the rule is that if you want to study health and bodily matters and physical circumstances, you start from the sign that contains the lot of fortune. But if you want to start, or if you want to study matters that pertain to the native's will and the native's career and overall life direction, then you start from the sign that contains the lot of spirit. So generally speaking, the way that this works out in practice, all of their matters aside and all of their nuances aside, is that if you want to study career and life direction, you start from the lot of spirit. And if you want to study health matters, you start from the lot of fortune. So if we wanted to study career matters, we would start from the sign that contains the lot of spirit. And then whatever sign that is, whatever the period is associated with that sign, that is the length of time in years that the first chapter of the native's life will last. So for example, if the lot of spirit falls in Gemini, then the first chapter of the native's life will last for 20 years, and that will be the length of the first chapter of their life with respect to their career and their overall life direction. And what happens is that that sign of the zodiac in that person's birth chart, as well as the planetary ruler of that sign or the domicile lord of that sign, are activated for the number of years associated with that sign. And once that number of years is up, so for example, in our chart where we started from Gemini, which has a 20-year period, once that 20 years is up and it completes, you then move to the next sign in zodiacal order, which in this instance would be Cancer. So Cancer is the sign that comes after Gemini in zodiacal order, which is always counterclockwise around the chart. So then it would activate Cancer for 25 years, which is the period associated with that sign. And then the second chapter of the native's life for their career and overall life direction would be activating the sign of Cancer, and the moon, which is the ruler of Cancer, would become the Time Lord for that 25-year chapter of the native's life. Once that 25 years is up, it moves to the next sign in zodiacal order, which would be to Leo for 19 years, which is the period associated with that sign. And then it just keeps moving forward at this variable rate based on the planetary period associated with each of the signs of the zodiac. So it's a sign-based or zodiacally based system, and that's one of the reasons why it's called Zodiacal Releasing. So there's a lot of different interpretive nuances and distinctions and details in terms of once you've calculated what sign of the zodiac is activated in a person's life during a given period of time, how do you then tell what that means? And there's a lot of different factors that go into that, like what planets are placed in the sign that's become activated, what planets are aspecting the sign that's become activated, what is the condition of the ruler of that sign, and what planets are configured to that planet. You also want to look at other things. There's other more sort of complicated or exotic things to look at, like when you're doing zodiac releasing from the lot of spirit to study the native's career, when it comes around to a sign that is angular relative to the lot of fortune in the chart, that will often coincide with a period of heightened activity and heightened importance in terms of the native's career and overall life direction. So this is what I refer to as a peak period, or a period of heightened importance and activity, because those usually tend to be more active or sort of high points in terms of a person's career. So that's something I talk about in more detail elsewhere. So there's a lot of different interpretive distinctions and nuances and other details with this technique. So the way that I just described it is just the primary level, where you establish what the chapters of the native's life are, and each of those chapters can last anywhere from 8 years as the shortest chapter length that there can be in the 2 Libra signs, to the longest, which is 30 years, which is the period associated with the sign Aquarius. So within each of those general period chapters, there's also sub-periods where you can divide things up into periods of shorter duration, where instead of years being attributed to each of the signs, you can attribute months to each of the signs. So within each of the sort of quote-unquote chapters of the native's life, these are the paragraphs within the individual chapters. And then those paragraphs can actually be broken down into 3rd and 4th level subperiods in order to study individual sentences and even individual words within the overall paragraphs and chapters of the native's life. And once you do that, you can actually work out a pretty detailed story about the native's entire life narrative and the broad sort of outline or overview of where the native is headed with their life. So I think that's kind of it in terms of this broad overview and introduction, where I just wanted to very quickly talk a little bit about the technique, give you a brief introduction to it, and tell you a little bit how it's calculated. That way, if you come across it in a software program or in one of the online programs that are available out there today to calculate the technique, of which there's a growing number, there's more and more programs that are incorporating this technique every day because of how popular it's becoming and because how many people are sort of using it and getting excited about it. I just wanted to give a brief overview to explain what the technique is about and the sort of basics of how it's calculated. So obviously there's a lot more that goes into that in terms of interpretive nuances and distinctions and details about how to apply the technique. So if you'd like to learn more about the technique, the last chapter of my new book on the subject, my new book on ancient astrology, which is titled Hellenistic Astrology, the Study of Fate and Fortune, I've got a whole chapter that's about 30 pages long on Zodiacal Releasing, and it includes, I think, something like 15 or 20 example charts in order to show you how the technique works. I also have an online course on Hellenistic astrology that teaches both the Zodiacal Releasing Time Lord technique as well as another Time Lord technique known as Annual Perfections, and I offer the Zodiacal Releasing class as sort of a separate module for those who would just like to sign up for that class, and it features a 18-hour lecture where I give, I think, something like over 50 example charts and really go into all of the nuances and details to teach you everything you could ever possibly want to know about Zodiacal Releasing and my approach to using that technique. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can find out more information at my website, theastrologyschool.com. And you can also find out more information about Hellenistic astrology in general at my other website, which is hellenisticastrology.com. All right, so I think that's it for this video. So thanks for watching. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, then please subscribe to my channel on YouTube, and I'll see you next time.